Yeah, welcome. Thanks everyone for taking the time out of your day to listen in again. I think looking at some of the names that have signed in, a few were on the previous webinars that we've had, which is good, but some new faces as well, which is nice to see. Some businesses that I know quite well and some I don't, which is good. But yeah, we'll kick straight off. So yeah, my name's Michael Atkinson. I've got Ben Atkinson also online as well. So we're both partners at PureWealth in the accounting division. And we've had quite a lot of conversation the past week or two, well, probably 12 to 18 months around government support and the like for small business. So yeah, these applications for JobSaver and the micro business grant, which is what we're going to go through today, I think came out on the weekend, Saturday or Sunday. Applications opened yesterday. So that's what we're going to be mainly talking about today. All right, we'll kick straight off. So I'll share my screen and I've got a bit of a slideshow just to follow through. If you've got any questions, there should be a chat or a Q&A box that you'll be able to post things in. Do that whenever and we can deal with them as your questions arise, or we can deal with them at the end as well. Bit of a disclaimer that this is just general advice. So if you are going to make any decisions on this and it's a bit and you're a bit unsure as to how it all plays with your personal circumstances, then please ask for advice either from us or from your advisor, your accountant. Great. So quick agenda. What government support is currently available for businesses, eligibility criteria, and what you need to do now, with a bit of Q&A at the end as well. So same sort of support that we talked about last week. Nothing's really changed, or there's no new support out there at the moment. Just a bit more clear guidelines as to how some of them work now, which is good. So the main ones that have been open for a little over a week now is the Small Business Covid-19 Support Grant, which is the $7,500, the $10,500 or the $15,000 grant, depending on how much your business has declined in turnover. So I don't know if anyone has been receiving payments yet. Have you heard of anyone receive their payment, Ben?
No, not yet.
So I'm assuming they'll come through very shortly if you haven't received them, but applications have opened and we've had quite a lot of businesses already apply for that. So it should be coming through any day now. The micro business grant is the one that we'll chat through in a bit of detail today. That opened yesterday. Hospitality and tourism COVID-19 support grants. I haven't heard that much on that since it all came out. So I'm not too sure if the applications are open. I might have a quick look whilst Ben's chatting and see if there's any movement on that. But I think that's still a TBC. The COVID-19 disaster payment, which has been around for a few weeks, now $600 a week for employees that have been impacted by reduction in hours by their employers. That's been around for a while, and I was speaking to someone yesterday and they applied, and within 15 minutes the money came into their account. So that one's pretty quick, which is good. JobSaver applications opened yesterday, which we'll chat through in detail today. Small business fees and charges rebate, which is the $1,500 rebate for government, New South Wales Council government fees and the like, which you can apply for. Payroll tax deferral and relief for all the businesses that are paying payroll tax. That's around a deferral until the end of October, and some relief there as well, which is good. Landlord support and tenant eviction moratorium, making it a bit harder for landlords to lock tenants out if they're not paying rent and the like, and the mental health support programs around there as well. So same sort of stuff as to what we spoke about before, but yeah, we'll go through a couple of them in more detail now. So, JobSaver. Applications opened yesterday. So it's a payment of 40% of your weekly payroll for employees in New South Wales. So minimum amount, $1,500 per week, and maximum amount is $10,000 per week. And then if you don't have employees, if you're a sole trader or maybe a trust with no employees or something like that, then you can be eligible for $1,000 per week payment. How the payment's meant to be used is similar to how the COVID grant payment should be used, and previous grants as well. It can't just be given to you or to your business, and then you save it. It needs to be spent on things like wages and rent and perishable goods and the like. So it's really important that you keep receipts and records as to what you're receiving the payment and spending it on, because Service New South Wales will be doing a lot of audit activity in this area over the next 12, 18, 24 months. So you will need to keep these records. It's really important. I've had a few clients get audited from the previous $3,000 and $10,000, $5,000 grants last year. They are doing a bit of activity in this. The payments that they're paying are really quick. Doesn't necessarily mean that you're eligible for it, because I don't think there's actually many people in Service New South Wales actually assessing them as you apply. They're basically just releasing the money, and then they'll bring out audit activity over the next couple of years to make sure everyone's actually eligible, and they'll be clawing back payments if you aren't eligible. So that's really important. Just take note of that. So this is all the criteria to receive JobSaver. So fairly straightforward ones. You need to be in business, and ABN needs to be in business at 1st of June. Annual turnover between $75,000 and $50 million. So any business that is less than $75,000 annual turnover, then we'll chat through the micro business grant that you might be eligible for, but this one's only between that turnover. The decline in turnover test amount is 30%. That needs to be over a minimum of a 2-week period starting on the 26th of June. Like the other grants, they're saying that you need to compare it to a same period back in 2019. So if you use the period 26th of June to the 9th of July, then you would need to compare it to the 26th of June 2019 to the 9th of July 2019 to see if you passed that 30% drop. Some of the things that I think might be important just when you're testing that drop in turnover period, it says a minimum 2-week period. So I think you can, my understanding is you can use a 15-day or a 16-day period or a 3-week period. It doesn't necessarily need to be 2 weeks. There's a bit of conflicting material online around that, especially on the Service New South Wales. But when you read the guidelines, it does say minimum 2-week period. The application process doesn't really talk about a 2-week period. It does talk about a 2-week period. It doesn't talk about a minimum, but I still think you, looking at the guidelines, you might be able to use a 15 or a 16-day period if that better suits your circumstances. There's a difference for this JobSaver if you're an employing business or a non-employing business. So for employing businesses, you need to maintain your employee headcount on the 13th of July, which is similar to the grant that was released last week. So you can't be terminating employees and the like, which we'll chat through. And for non-employing businesses, like sole traders or non-employing trusts, the business income needs to be the person running the business, their primary income source. So if you're running maybe a small business or a business and you've got a full-time employment somewhere else, and you don't have any other employees, then you might not be eligible for this grant. So it doesn't need to be primary income source. That's not the situation, or that doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be a primary income source if you've got actual employees, though.
Yeah, so just on the JobSaver scheme, it's obviously a support measure for business owners, or for businesses. And the key criteria in determining which support measure applies to which business is based on turnover. So the JobSaver scheme is for businesses with turnover above 75,000. We're going to talk a little bit later about the grant that's for micro businesses, which is for businesses with turnover below 75,000. The key criteria in determining your turnover is based on your 2020 tax return. So you're essentially looking at what your income was in the 12-month period up to the 30th of June 2020.
Yeah. So a few things just to point out. How do you measure turnover? Which same sort of thing as what the other grant was talking about in terms of GST turnover. So it's basically how you lodge your BAS determines how you calculate turnover. So on your BAS, if you're on a cash basis, you should be using a cash basis turnover amount. If you're lodging BASs on an accruals basis, so when you invoice clients and customers, then it should be based on when you actually invoice the clients and not when you're getting paid. So it's been a bit of an issue, especially in the construction industry for the larger builders and the like, that they really didn't, they might have had quite a bit of outstanding payments from customers for work done pre-lockdown that they're currently receiving payment for. But if they're reporting their BAS on a cash basis, if they're actually receiving the money this week and last week, then they might not be eligible for any of the grants at the moment, even though they're actually not doing any work at the moment. So it's going to be, in a week or a couple of weeks where their cash income will dry up. At the moment, it's becoming pretty problematic for them that they might not be eligible for a lot of these grants. I guess it just depends on how long lockdown lasts and how long businesses are closed. But it is a bit of an issue there. One that we get a lot of questions on is the comparison period, which is fun because when you talk to Service New South Wales, all they say is give us a call and we'll talk through your circumstances, but then you try and call them and they don't pick up. I'm still waiting on a call back from Monday last week. They sent an email out on Friday night about 7:30 saying they're inundated requests and they're backlogged with phone calls. Still haven't received a phone call from them yet. But I've had a lot of clients and spoken to a lot of other people, and they have spoken to Service New South Wales. With this comparison period, they're basically saying you need to compare it to 2019, the same period in 2019. But if that doesn't suit your circumstances for whatever reason, like you weren't operating or in business back in 2019, then you can use a similar period that isn't in 2019. So you might be able to use, let's just say you were using the period 26th of June to 9th of July 2021. You might be able to compare it to 26th of June 2020 to the 9th of July 2020 instead of comparing to 2019. You got other cases where companies have purchased businesses or have sold businesses, and that impacts their turnover quite a bit. Or if businesses, had a really bad June, July 2019 because of whatever particular reason, maybe they took some annual leave or the main person took some annual leave or something like that, then it might be hard to show a drop if you had a poor June, July 19. But I think they're being pretty reasonable with it. And if you can just argue your case and state as to why 2019 isn't a good comparison period for you or for your business, then I think they'll be pretty reasonable with that. The one that I'm not all that comfortable with is if businesses just naturally grown over time. So it'll be interesting to see if they bring out some more guidelines on that or the like. Because it's pretty easy for a business today to be, I don't know, twice as big as what they were back in 2019. The last few months, maybe March, April, May this year, they've been performing really well. And then June, July, they've had a massive drop, but it doesn't compare to 2019. How can they access these grants? I'm not overly comfortable that they are eligible, but I haven't seen any information to say they are or aren't. But just looking through all the JobKeeper, I just looking through all the previous grants and criteria, their eligibility criteria, I'm not too sure if they will be eligible. Is that your thoughts, Ben?
Yeah, well, the guidelines are fairly rigid. So if you don't fit into the framework, then the process is to get into contact with Service New South Wales to discuss your services. So I've had a few cases now where businesses have been impacted, in recent times, but their comparative period doesn't reflect what the business looks like now. So they've essentially made changes to their operations or services that they provide because of COVID in a way to stay competitive and basically survive. And in those circumstances, there's been different comparative measures that have been agreed to fit into the guidelines for other grants. So I would assume that those same discussions and that same type of flexibility will be applied this time around for the JobSaver scheme. So sorry, just with that those discussions I was talking about was in relation to the business grant, so it's a different measure. But I guess the point to make was that there was some discretion and some flexibility being shown by Service New South Wales in the way that they're determining the comparison period where the business has changed.
With the next one, the employee headcount, a lot of questions on that. So businesses that are completely closed can still maintain headcount if they haven't terminated employee-employer relationships. So if you just stood down an employee and you're waiting for lockdown to end, and then once lockdown ends, everything kind of returns to normal and the employee resumes work, then you can still meet this maintaining employee headcount criteria. The key thing here is it needs to be for full-time or part-time employees and for long-term casuals, so more than 12-month casuals. So if you do have casuals that have only been there for a few months and they're no longer working for you and they might not come back and work for you later, they don't particularly matter. It's just your full-time part-timers. Don't terminate employee relationships. Keep them still around. It's just they're not working at the moment. It's still down. You'll be fine with this employee headcount. With JobSaver, you need to actually, in the application, which will be a little bit tricky, is you need to, well, for some businesses it will, you need to state your employee headcount. So whether you've got 2 full-timers or 3 full-timers, a couple of casuals, whatever it is, when you're doing that, you just include these people, so full-timers, part-timers or long-term casuals. And you're making a declaration to Service New South Wales that you're going to maintain them over the period of lockdown. So, you actually declare that in your application. If that changes, then you need to actually go back into Service New South Wales and tell them, and you might not be eligible for JobSaver moving forward. If employees resign, then that's okay. It doesn't affect your eligibility. Calculation of weekly payroll has been a bit of an unknown, but now we finally know how to do it, which is good. and it is on pre-COVID wages, so not on current wages. So the way you do that is you look at the last BAS that you've lodged, and you do a bit of a calculation on the wages that you reported in that BAS. So the key declaration in the BAS is the W1 amounts, which is basically gross wages. So if you're on a quarterly BAS lodgement program, then the last BAS that you would have lodged would be the January, February, March BAS. If you're on a monthly activity statement program for wages, then the last one would probably likely be the month of May. So if you do a bit of a quick calculation, if you have, let's say you're on a monthly program and you've got $40,000 of wages declared on the month of month of May, the way you would do that is, if I just pull out the calculator, you would go $40,000, divide that by the number of days in the month of May, which is 31 days. So that gives you $1,290 a day of wages. And then you'd multiply that by 7 to give you your weekly wages amount. So that's $9,032. And then the grant, the JobSaver grant, is 40% of that. So if you multiply that by 40%, you get $3,612 per week that you'd be entitled to. So when you're actually doing your JobSaver application, you would need to complete a declaration as to what your weekly wages are. And that's how you would do it if you're a monthly lodger. It doesn't include super, so super doesn't get included in W1. If you're a business that has employees all over Australia, it's going to be a little bit trickier. Worked through a couple of them and it is a pain, but you just need to include your New South Wales wages only. So it's not quite just your W1 amounts. If you're a quarterly lodger, so you would go back to your January, February, March BAS. So let's say there was $50,000 of wages declared on your January, February, March BAS. You would divide that by the number of days in that quarter, which would be, how many days in February? Probably 28. 28 plus 62. 31, 62, 80. Yeah, 90 days, hopefully. So you go $50,000 in the quarter of March, divide that by 90 days in the quarter of the March BAS. Can you just double check those days, Ben? So that's $555 of wages per day. And then you would multiply that by 7 to get your weekly wages of $3,888 a week. And then you'd get 40% of that, which is $1,555. If that 40% amount reduces below $1,500, then you just get the minimum $1,500. If that amount goes above $10,000 a week, then you'll just get the maximum amount of $10,000 a week. Okay.
There is 90 days in that March quarter period.
Great.
Yeah.
I was struggling without my calculator.
Yeah.
So that's how you would calculate that weekly payroll amount. I've done a few calculations, and some it works out, like if you're using the month of May, sometimes it works out really well, because I've had some clients have 5 weekly payroll periods in the month of May, which works out pretty good for them. Others maybe not so good, but that's how they're telling us to calculate it. They say that employees can receive the disaster payment if the employer is receiving JobSaver. So it doesn't rule you out, which is good. If you're a non-employing business, you won't be eligible for JobSaver if you're receiving the disaster payment. And that's since the 18th of July. So I believe if you received disaster in the first 4 weeks of lockdown, then you would be, and you stop receiving disaster, then you should be eligible for JobSaver. JobSaver is probably going to be better for you because the disaster is only $600 a week, whereas JobSaver is for a non-employing business, $1,000 per week. So that's pretty important. I would be trying to get off disaster and go on to JobSaver if you were in that category. You got to declare that the business is the primary income source of the owner of the business. And it's an automatic fortnightly payment, so you don't need to keep reapplying. I assume the first payment will come through probably at the end of this week or potentially early next week. It's in arrears. Bit of a question mark over when it will stop. The easy answer is probably when lockdown stops, but I'm not too sure if that'll be the case because lockdown is going to end at a whole range of different times and dates and the like for different industries. And even if lockdown does end, businesses are still going to be pretty impacted by it. And things will take a little while to return to normal. So I'm not too sure if they're going to say, if you're still having a reduction in turnover, then you'll still be eligible, or if it's just when lockdown ends, they'll turn off the payment, or whether they'll do it for another couple of weeks after businesses get back up and running. It's a bit of an unknown. That's just a bit of a wait and see. I don't think anyone really knows when lockdown's going to end, so it's probably not an issue at the moment. They're probably going to tackle it in a few weeks' time when they get a bit more information on it. Got a few questions that we will go through. If you're a business owner who owns a cafe and works in the business, can the business owner claim JobSeeker in addition to COVID-19 disaster payment for themselves as they are technically an employee? I had this one yesterday, and which is lucky. I don't think you are. When you go into claim disaster, it asks you whether you're on JobSeeker or not, and if you are, you're not eligible for the disaster. But I'd be questioning whether you are actually entitled to JobSeeker now if you're a business owner who owns a cafe and you're working in the cafe, because I think the criteria for being eligible for JobSeeker would be that you're actually looking for employment and you're not employed at the moment. I'm not a JobSeeker expert, and it did come out, when was that? Probably April last year. So I'd be questioning whether you're actually entitled to JobSeeker or not. But with that situation, if you're running a cafe and you've got other employees, you'd probably be better off, if you kind of think that through, you'd probably be better off getting, if your turnover is more than 75,000, then you'd be eligible for the grant, depending on how much your decline in turnover is, either 7,500, 10,500 or 15,000, which is a good lump sum, once-off lump sum for the first 3 weeks of lockdown. And then you would be eligible for JobSaver, depending on how much you pay in wages on a weekly basis. And then if you do have other employees, you as the business owner could get the disaster payment as well if you're reducing your own hours by more than 8 hours a week or 20 hours a week, depending on how much you want to get from the disaster payment. If you're under the $75,000 turnover, then you'd probably just be eligible for the micro business grant, which Ben is about to chat through. Can it be used to pay annual leave while staff are not working? Yes, you can do whatever you like with it. You just got to, well, sorry, you can't do whatever you like with it. You need to use it for one of those things here, how the funding must be used or may be used. So salary and wages would be included in that. So if you're paying annual leave, I think that would be okay.
I think just to add to that question, the JobSaver scheme, the support measures or the funding that's available, it's on wages that are prior to, in a prior period to when the lockdown measures have come about. And the payments or the entitlement to JobSaver is not dependent on wages that are paid to employees. So hopefully that can kind of put a little bit, add a little bit to that question around annual leave, because the JobSaver scheme is essentially funding that's available to business owners. And that funding, to be eligible for that criteria, doesn't require actual payment of wages to those business owners. So if there's no work for those employees, then those employees can be stood down and they would be eligible for the disaster payment. And this JobSaver scheme will be funding that's there for the business to help the business get through the lockdown measures or to get through this lockdown period.
Cut-off date for turnover decline. I haven't heard of a cut-off date yet. So it starts on the 26th of June. So as of today, the 27th of July, I think if you've had a 2-week period that you can show a 30% decline in turnover, and then you'd be eligible. If you still need to wait another week or so until you can calculate it, because maybe in the first 3 or 4 weeks you had no drop in turnover and only recently you have, then they haven't really been all that clear as to when you would be eligible. If you can kind of predict your income or forecast your income, I don't think you would be able to forecast your income. I think it's based on actuals. So my thoughts are you would need to wait until the end of the period that you've had a decline and then apply. So yeah, I guess the unknown around this is how long lockdown's going to last and how long your decline in turnover is going to last and those sorts of things. But yeah, there's no cut-off date at the moment. The thing that I'd be interested to see, the JobSavers for costs incurred from the 18th of July, and the COVID grant was for the first 3 weeks of lockdown. So obviously we've already had an extra week or so since the 18th of July. So if you're eligible maybe in a week's time, based on the last 2 weeks of drop in turnover, would you be eligible from the start date of JobSaver, or would you only be eligible from the start of the 2-week period that you're using to test the drop in turnover? So if you could only prove that your drop in turnover was from the 22nd of July to the 4th of August, then would you be only eligible from the 22nd of July onwards, and not from the 18th? It's a bit of a unknown at the moment in my eyes. I think the way they're thinking about it at the moment is they're keeping it simple, and they just say if you've had a 2-week turnover, a drop in turnover from the 26th of June, then you'd be eligible from the 18th of July. I think that's how they're thinking about it at the moment, but that could change. Does a director of the business taking drawings count as part of the payroll? I have one full-time staff member on payroll and myself as the owner. It depends what your drawings are. If you're trading through a partnership or trading through as a sole trader or trading through a company, drawings can mean a lot of different things. So knowing this person's situation, I believe they operate through a trust. So the drawings would be classified as a trust distribution and not as a wage. So it wouldn't be included as payroll, and you don't include those drawings in W1 and your BAS. So JobSaver wouldn't be applicable on that, or wouldn't be calculated on those drawings. You'd only get JobSaver on your full-time staff member, and that's all. But I guess, drawings, it depends on your structure and what they're actually classified as when we do your tax returns. They could be dividends or wages or directors' fees or partnership distributions or a whole range of different things. So I think it's probably a good idea to talk to your accountant to see what the drawings actually are. Does the employee headcount include the owners? Yes, if they're an employee of the business. So if you're getting paid as an employee, you would include them. Again, it's not going to be an issue because I don't think you're going to terminate the employee-employer relationship if it's just yourself. So it's probably not going to be that much of an issue if you, I guess, get that declaration wrong. If you put one person or two people, one person just being the other employee and you didn't include the owner, or you put two people, one employee and the owner, as long as that doesn't change, like you don't terminate someone and that employee relationship, I don't think it's going to have a material impact on your eligibility for JobSaver. As per the business grant calculation finishing 19th of July, is there a cut-off date for drop-in turnover count JobSaver? Yeah, I think we've just answered that one, which is good. Cool. I think that's all the questions at the moment. We've just posted in the chat as well a link to the JobSaver payment eligibility and application form on Service New South Wales. So you can go in there straight away and basically apply for it. You'll need things like, if you're, just one thing to note, if you're eligible for the grant, then you would be automatically eligible for JobSaver. I think you still need to go, well, you do need to still go in and apply for it and submit a bunch of information, but you'll be able to jump straight in and apply for it. You'll need BASs and copies of tax returns and copies of accountants' letters and the like. All right, we'll move on. Micro business grant.
Okay, so I guess the key distinction between the micro business grant and the JobSaver scheme is based on turnover. There's a few changes or a few differences with the way the scheme works, but in determining which scheme is applicable to you, you look at your turnover in the period to 30th of June 2020. So for businesses that have got a turnover between 30,000 and 75,000 in the 30 June 2020 period, then this is the grant that you would be looking to apply for. The payment, it's $1,500 a fortnight, and it says the payments will be made in arrears and backdated to the 26th of June 2021. So that was a little bit of a, I guess, the micro business grant is, they're saying that it's obviously there's going to be a backdating. So I'm not sure with businesses that are eligible or that have it show a decline in turnover for the micro business grant in a later period, it seems that they'll still get payments to be backdated before they've shown the decline in turnover, if that makes sense. So that was something that was a little bit interesting to me that I've seen with the guidance that was released on the website. If you click through, Mick, we've got, so the eligibility criteria for the grant is need to have an ABN and be in business and need to be operating in New South Wales. The turnover we've spoke about, and it's the same decline in turnover test. You need to show a decline in turnover of 30% or more, so it's the same as the JobSaver scheme. And it's a 2-week period, but it does have specified dates in the guidance that's been released. So they're saying that the period that you test to is 26th of June to the 30th of July. So essentially you need to be showing a decline in turnover in a 2-week period from this Friday. And again, the comparison period is the same period in 2019. The grant is used to cover business costs, so similar to the JobSaver scheme. And to be eligible for the business grant, you are not able to apply for the Covid-19 business grant or the JobSaver payment. So that one, given your turnover, you wouldn't be eligible for those 2 grants either. But it is one of the guidelines that's released on the website. So with micro businesses, if you're an employing business, again, you need to maintain your employee headcount. And if you're a non-employing business, then and you're receiving the payment, must be your primary source of income. So again, we kind of spoke a little bit about that with the JobSaver scheme. I think it definitely would need to be your highest source of income. Potentially there might be a little bit more weighting that's applied to the business income that you're receiving to show that decline if you do have a mix of income sources. So say, for example, you are a business owner and you also have income from employment sources. The other criteria with this one, which works a little bit different to the JobSaver scheme, is if you're a non-employing business, you're not eligible to claim on the disaster payment. And if you're an employing business, then your employees can receive the disaster payment as well. So I would assume, or it's possible that if you're, so I guess just to summarize that one, if you're an employing business, it seems that potentially you could apply for the business grant. Your employees would be able to apply for the disaster payments, and potentially yourself would be able to apply for the disaster payments. If you're a non-employing business, then you've got to choose one or the other. So definitely wouldn't be eligible for both. And the grant's available for individuals that are in business. So if you're earning investment income, it's not available even if you have an ABN. Do you want to click over, Mick?
Let's just see if there's any questions on that. We also posted the micro business grant application guidelines in the chat as well. So you should be able to jump in and apply for that straight away. I'm a sole trader. I'm under the $30,000 income requirement. What grant does apply?
So the micro business grant, you wouldn't be eligible because you need to have the turnover between 30,000 and 75,000. So that's in the period to the 30th of June 2020. So these 2 grants are to business owners. The additional support measure is a disaster payment that is available to individuals. So as an individual, if you've had a reduction in income a reduction in hours of 8 hours or more, then you would be eligible to claim under the disaster payment scheme. So not necessarily through the business channel, it'd be through the disaster payment channel. So these two schemes are administered through Service New South Wales. So that's the JobSaver scheme and the micro business grant. Both the schemes that are through New South Wales are a little bit higher. So the income that's available, or the funding that's available, is more than what's available through the disaster payments. But the disaster payment scheme, in my mind, is therefore a bit of a fallback measure. It's a little bit easier to determine. There's no criteria on a decline in turnover for sole traders. It's in a reduction in hours worked, if that makes sense. So if you're a business owner and you don't fit into the guidelines or the criteria for the micro business grant, then you'd be looking at the disaster payment.
Any other questions on this one? I'm eligible for and have registered my interest for the micro business grant through the Service New South Wales website. So do I now just wait to be contacted?
The applications came open yesterday, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So I think registering your interest isn't going to submit an application. If I've read that question.
Registering your interest is just going on a mailing list with Service New South Wales. So if they haven't contacted you to register, if you jump into that link Sienna has posted in the chat, you'll be able to apply directly through here. I think somewhere, this is the guidelines. If we go back to application process, I'll post another link in there that shows the application. You might not need to worry about reading the guidelines. Where is the micro business grant? Here. There you go. So there's an apply online button here that you'll be able to jump in and apply straight through there. So you can do that now. Another question. If you are a business owner and operate and work a cocktail bar that has employees and has more than $75,000 in turnover, can you claim COVID-19 business grant in addition to COVID-19 disaster payment for the business owner, as they are an employee, as they pay themselves a wage from the business? I would have thought you would be able to, providing you meet all the criteria. So if you pick that apart, so I guess it depends on your structure. If you're running your business through a company, then you'd be paying yourself a wage. So if you reduce your hours by more than 8 hours, then you'd be eligible as an employee for the disaster payment. And with the COVID-19 business grant, if you've had a drop in turnover of more than 30%, then you would be eligible for the business grant. Because there's nothing in the guidelines that say your employees can't receive the disaster payment, which will then make you ineligible for the business grant or JobSaver. It's the one that you can get into trouble or stuck with is if you're a non-employing business. Then if you're a non-employing business, then the main person running the business can't get the disaster payment. But in your situation, I don't see any issues with applying for both. Jenny. Thanks. Do we need any email from you, or can we go ahead and apply? You need to apply yourself. We won't be able to do it for you, unfortunately. You will need some documentation off us or off your accountant. There's quite a few people on the line that we don't look after your tax affairs, so you would need to talk to your own accountant about that. Your accountant will need to provide an accountant's letter proving your drop in turnover. You also need to provide your tax return and provide, for the JobSaver, provide a copy of your last BAS. And you might need to talk to your accountant about how to work out your weekly wages if that's not clear. If you're on quarterly BASs or monthly BASs and days in the period and those sorts of things, which is all fun and games. So once you get all that information, you will then have to apply yourself. All right, I think that's the majority of the questions at the moment, which is good. What you can do now. So you can apply for the COVID-19 support grant, ones that opened last the 9th of June. You can apply for JobSaver. You can apply for the micro business grant if your turnover is between 30,000 and 75,000. So all those applications are open. So you'll be able to get stuck into them straight away. I guess if you're in the business or in the industry that you haven't been able to prove a drop in turnover yet for a full 2-week period, then my thoughts are you just need to wait. You can apply for the COVID-19 disaster payment if you're eligible for that as an employee, or get your employees to apply for it if you've stood them down or reduced their hours. And then I guess it's still kind of the same sort of discussions around what you need to do longer term with your employees. There's already been 4 or 5 weeks of lockdown, so you can't really do much and change much for the first 4 or 5 weeks. But I guess if it's going to last another 4 weeks, you still need to keep having conversations with employees and deciding what they want to do and what suits your business and the like. So I guess we went through this in our last webinar, and it is still current. There's a few changes due to the criteria actually being released, but most of the options still stand in terms of, I guess, option 1, standing down your employees. If you've got no work and doors are closed, you don't pay your staff, and staff can potentially receive the disaster payment. I'll get Sienna to post a link in the chat, which is a great website to refer back to the Fair Work website that talks about how you can stand down employees and make sure that you don't get into trouble from a Fair Work perspective. So that's really important that you don't end up with an unfair dismissal case or a Fair Work employee workplace law case against you and your business. It's definitely not my area of expertise, but the website that Fair Work has released is pretty practical and pretty easy to follow. So we'll look through that. You can pay your staff their normal pay, even though they're not working for it, if you're a very generous employer. I guess the longer it goes, probably less likely that will be the case, but that is an option. You can take the opportunity to reduce staff annual leave entitlements, and I guess actually pay them annual leave is probably a better way of putting it. So some employees won't be able to live off the disaster. So they might want to take some annual leave and top up their pay. So you might be able to do a combination of all of them to kind of best suit your circumstance. I think kind of looking from a high level overview, you'd probably want to try and get the employee to receive some of the disaster payment, because that is obviously going to be a payment that's not going to come from, to fall back on the business. The government will fund the disaster payment instead of the business being able to fund it. So to be eligible for the disaster, they would need, the employee's hours would need to be reduced by at least 8 hours, 1 day in the week. And then potentially paying them a bit of annual leave as well to top them up might be a reasonable outcome. You'll get the JobSaver. If the JobSaver, you've got a lot of other overheads to cover, then you might not be able to afford paying annual leave and staff wages. But if your business is pretty well set up with low overheads, you might be able to afford to pay staff annual leaves. I know there's a few issues going around with employees at the moment, with retention issues. Employees are in demand. Staff don't want to take annual leave now because they want to save it up for when lockdown ends. Annual leave at the moment is pretty boring in Sydney. And some staff want to receive the full pay and think all this government support is there for businesses to afford to pay staff their full pay, which may or may not be the case. Businesses have a lot of overheads themselves, so it's not necessarily that black and white. But some employees and some staff believe that. So it's a bit of a juggling act, but there's no right or wrong answer. It's just a matter of all these grants and all these options are making sure that when lockdown ends, the business is ready to open up and you don't go broke in the meantime. I think that's everything. We might have a couple of additional questions. Do we need to get another version of the accountant's letter issued for JobSaver, or will the letter from the COVID-19 grant suffice? Good question. Do you know the exact answer, Ben?
I thought not. Yeah, I thought that it'd be a new application, but because you already have demonstrated the decline in turnover, that you would be eligible and it'd be the same letter. But
yeah, I think that's what the guidelines say, that you can use the same letter. Well, you don't need to get another letter. But just reading the accountant's letter that they put out for JobSaver, it is slightly different. But my understanding is you can use the same letter. Yep. I think that's everything. Great. All right, we'll wrap it up. Thanks everyone for signing in. Hopefully you got a bit out of it, and good luck applying, and let us know if you need a hand with the application process.